Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
More than 25 years ago, the interview series called Reflections in Time was developed by the late Professor Paul Borghi. It was intended to preserve some of the history of the University of Nebraska at Omaha by recording experiences, people who contributed to its development. With the aid of the UNO Alumni Association, I've continued Paul's work with the series. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960, and I served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in developing his original interview series, and I continue it today as a tribute to him. It's a little blustery day. The year is 2007, and we're in the month of February, late in the month. And I have as my guest in the studio today Professor Kris Berg in the School of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation. Welcome, Kris. We're glad to have you here.
It's good being here.
Let's start in talking a little bit about you. We've known each other for a long time, but I don't think I've ever asked you about your roots. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
Well, I was born in Bremerton, Washington. Lived there just in those first several early years of my life. Age 4, moved to Baltimore, Maryland. Spent about 2 years there. Went to Springfield, Massachusetts for 6 years. Then to Yonkers, New York for 6 years, just outside the Bronx. And then by that time, I was into my first year of college. My dad was a school administrator, so we moved often, you know, which I think had a real influence on me. I still love to travel, and I think I owe from language and food and so on. There were enough differences in different areas of the country where we lived. I think that was all kind of fascinating to me, even as a young boy.
From the far west coast to the east coast.
That's right.
You really got around. And I didn't know that you'd spent some time in my old stamping grounds in the Northeast.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. Did you go to high school then in
Yonkers, New
Yonkers.
York? That's right.
Yeah, I had a second cousin who taught music in Yonkers for a long time.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so.
I mean, see, my dad was a music educator.
Oh, really?
He was superintendent of music in the Yonkers public schools.
Well, I'll bet you that my cousin knew him then.
Yeah. But most certainly would have.
Yeah, because she taught there for a long time. Her name was Newton, too. So.
Sure.
But how did you end up in Kansas? That's where you had your undergraduate education.
Yeah, my folks, I went 1 year in school to Ithaca College while we were back in the East Coast, and my dad took a job as the superintendent of music in the Kansas City, Missouri public schools. So I went along and transferred to the University of Kansas, where I completed my last 3 years of school and received my bachelor's and eventually master's degree.
Okay, how did you decide on physical education as your vocation?
Yeah, well, I think it was one of those easy decisions. I enjoyed school. I did pretty well as a student. I loved sports. I mean, it was just something with my free time. I just instinctively, as a young boy, whether or not I was climbing trees, riding bicycles, or racing with other kids in the neighborhood, played on multiple baseball teams, just loved sports growing up. So I think all of a sudden when I began to realize in high school, gee, one has to select a major, and that becomes a factor in your decision for a school. So physical education just seemed like such a natural thing for me to want to do.
Well, were you active in sports in college too then?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I played soccer and track. And all through, ever since then, I mean, in a way, I look back at my life as a elementary school age child. I've never stopped enjoying playing sports and competing.
Right.
Even to today, I still love to get out and play a good tennis match and so on.
Well, now you went on to your master's degree quickly after your bachelor's degree. Did you? Was there a reason for that? Did you decide you wanted to become a teacher, or why did you pursue an advanced degree?
Well, the pay scale, to make more money, and I think my goal, as soon as I got into teaching, it was just part of who I was as a person, I think. So in the summer, I would started taking coursework at the University of Kansas, and after 3-4 years, completed my master's degree, and then did a master's thesis, which got me into the research. And it was one of those things, I no more knew what research was, nor ever felt that I would be ever, interested in it, or that'd become a part of my life. But a master's thesis and a real wonderful faculty member there, who's just a fine scholar, took me under his wing and showed me that I could do a few things. And that opened a whole new world that led to going on for the doctoral degree, and just the love of research, the love of learning. And that certainly is with me today, too.
Well, we'll talk about it a little more later, but you certainly have progressed beautifully in the research area. I mean, you've got a fine background in there.
Well, thank you. It's been an enjoyable part of my academic existence. It really has been. I've always loved being a teacher, but I love those hours trying to sift through your thoughts and trying to put into a parlance where you can clearly communicate. Those of us who write for a living, we know what a real challenge it is. So there's no ambiguity, and so you're getting right to the heart of the matter. And I really like that challenge. It's almost a little bit reminiscent of the challenge in sport, to hit the ball hard, but to place it on the court so it stays in bounds and your opponent can't get to it. I mean, there are a lot of parallels in some ways.
Well, speaking of challenges, if I remember correctly, you came to UNO here before you finished your doctoral degree. Yes,
I was one of those ABD. I saw some of the bright people in my doctoral program who at that time in the, this was 71 when I came here in the fall, so in the late 60s and 1970, I saw some people who were having difficulty getting the positions that they really wanted to, teaching and research positions. So I came to a conference in part just looking to see what was available job-wise, and met Dick Flynn, who was just in his first year here at UNO, and Dick was a young
department chairman back
department chair from Columbia University. And for those of us who know Dick, well, Dick is a persuasive man and is a wonderful public relations person. But gee, I mean, he convinced me that, my gosh, you better apply, because here are some courses that we need someone to teach. And these were courses that I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly, and my field of study is exercise physiology. And so getting the chance to teach courses in that specific area, the discipline, was my long-term goal.
Dick later became dean, and then is now...
He's president of Springfield College, Springfield, Massachusetts.
Springfield, where you spent some time.
Exactly, that's right.
And where they invented basketball.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, let's go back for a minute, though. We talked about challenges, and I suggested that maybe you faced a challenge in finishing your doctoral degree while you were working full-time here. Yeah,
I did, and gee, I remember back those days, and those were long days. When we have new faculty coming on board here, I've seen a good number of those people in our department and the whole university. So I always think back, and makes you realize, gee, they're to prepare for courses, to start your research agenda, and to be writing on the dissertation and so on. I hadn't even done my data collection, Jack, when I came here, so to conduct a study and then to do the data analysis and the write-up and so on.
So what was the topic of your dissertation?
Well, it was about developing power in muscle. And so there's kind of a unique training program that I put several hundred students through at Northwest High School. Had some wonderful help with some of the physical education teachers. They let me use the couple hundred boys in a weight training experiment, and we compared multiple ways of lifting weights to see what sort of programs would be best in generating human power that would translate onto the sports field.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, but you did finish that doctoral degree, and you were, by that time you had a job, and I was going to ask you how you happened to come to Omaha, but you just told me that it was Dick Flynn's influence, right?
Yeah, there was an opening for a job, and I found out about that and interviewed for the position, and I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if Dick ever told me this, but I think there was another applicant who beat me out. And of course I didn't realize this. Dick probably did remind me of this after the fact. So I think I was the #2 candidate, and I'm probably real fortunate that the other person, who was probably better prepared and so on, took a job elsewhere apparently.
Well, I meant to ask you too, how you happened to pick University of Missouri as a place for your doctoral work instead of continuing in Kansas. Yeah,
well, it was simply I felt I'd be better developed if I went to a different program, working with different faculty. There were a couple of outstanding people in my discipline who were doing some cutting-edge work at Missouri at that time, and getting a chance to be mentored by them and to take part in their research agenda really was what was critical in my development as a young scholar, I think.
So you came here in 1971, I think you said.
That's right.
And that was only a couple of years, 2 or 3 years after we became a part of the state university.
Yeah, I believe it was 69, wasn't it? Or 67, somewhere in that.
What were things like back then? Was it, we were growing pretty fast.
Yes. Well, I mean, having been here 36 years now, it's interesting historically to go back, and even the physical characteristics of the campus were so much larger. Things with all the, from the Bell Tower to the Durham Science Building, the Fine Arts Building, and then the South Campus. We are a totally different creature physically. And
there was no HPER building back then.
Well, it was the field house that we shared with the athletic department. So we had one wing of the hallway was the athletic department. One wing was the people in the academic side.
I was going to ask you to maybe elucidate on that a bit for our audience. Who there is a difference between athletics and physical education.
Yes.
They're not that they're not related, but
they're certainly related. But the academic areas, for example, physical education today is a broad field of study and academic preparation, depending on the university and so on. You could slice the pie into about 8-10 different areas. But my area is exercise physiology, where we look at the heart, lung, bone, muscle, nerve tissue, and so on. People in biomechanics study the details of how the human structure moves, looking at joint movement and looking at force production and velocity acceleration characteristics, oscillations of the center of gravity. And then other disciplines within the field are sports psychology, sports sociology, motor learning, motor development, and so on.
So it's really a big area.
Yeah, it is.
A diverse area.
And when we started off, when I first came to the department, we were somewhat understaffed. And with only about 4 of us full-time in the discipline, it was probably good for my preparation to have to teach a wide array of classes, some of which, quite honestly, I was probably somewhat ill-prepared. So I was usually a day ahead of the students, or one night's study ahead of the students. But I look at it today, it really broadened the depth of my preparation.
So to just finish up the answer to the question I asked, athletics is the competitive aspect of that.
That's right, yeah.
And where you have teams that compete against one another, and it's an administrative department usually instead of an academic department.
Yeah, so they're totally separate on most campuses. The athletic department and the athletic director normally report to the chancellor of a university, and so people aren't hired because of the academic characteristics, but in our field, we're academicians much as people in English or physics or chemistry would be.
No, I remember back when I first came here, and that was 11 years before you came here, Dr. Bale always insisted that anybody in athletics also have a faculty position, and that they would, all the coaches would teach and teach classes. And
that is true today. At a Division school, II school, like UNO, all of our coaches are, that they have a portion of their load where they do teach classes.
Do all of them like that?
I don't know. You know, I suppose it depends on the person, but I would say this in terms of the teaching quality that we get. When we look at the student evaluations, and having seen a number of these people, having worked with some of them, some of us act as so-called mentors for some of the coaches who probably are so busy in being occupied with the demands of coaching and so on. But gee, we have such wonderful support because they really do an amazingly good job quality-wise.
Yeah, and I think that's that we've been very fortunate that way, that we have people who are not only coaches but also are interested in students as in their academic career.
That's right. Well, I think we've always had such a good relationship with people who have been the athletic director. But when I look back at people like Don Leahy and Connie Clausen and Bob Dannenhauer, gee, they've all been such strong supporters. They want their faculty. They've, in some cases, they're former students here at UNO, so they want their coaches to be good teachers and to be respected for that too.
While we're elucidating that difference for our audience, maybe we could go one step further and talk about the structure of physical education in the College of Education. Right now we have a school. I introduced you as being a faculty member in the School of Health, Physical Education and Recreation. But when you came here, we didn't have that school.
It was a department, and there were actually separate men's and women's departments. And it was probably in the late, I believe about the late 70s, that the men's and women's departments were combined into one department, but then soon thereafter became the School of Health, Physical Education, Recreation.
And a school is an administrative structure within a college.
That's right. And we're the only school within the College of Education. And I think in part because of the diversity of the mission, the health unit, that they prepare people to work in public health agencies, and they prepare people to work in the public schools and so on. The field of recreation, many of the graduates go on to work in hospital work as recreational therapists, park and recreation supervisors, administrators, and then physical education. I was describing how many different specializations or academic disciplines within that.
I suspect that part of it too was attributable to Dick Flynn's persuasiveness in saying we ought to have a school.
Most certainly was. There were certain administrative advantages, shall we say, that were associated with us becoming a school, even budgetary too.
And so it wasn't too long after you came here that the current HPER building was constructed.
Well, it was built, we went into the building in January of '80, I believe. So I'd been here about 9 years. So I was here long enough.
But we thought all that time we were going to get it any year. And
but the governor vetoed the approval by the unicameral, and so we kept on thinking, well, it's almost time to start that building, right, and so on. So he was...
yes, there was considerable frustration when Governor
sure.
Exon kept vetoing the,
that's right,
the appropriation for that building.
That's right. And I guess in some ways, once the building was, we got approval for the building to be constructed, and the opportunity to move in, to order incredible research equipment. And I think Dick Flynn was very clever too. Our building, I think, over the last 27 years still looks good. I mean, it functions beautifully, but there was an awful lot of sacrifice in terms of putting a lot of dollars and cents into a better quality carpet, or desks, or lighting, and mortar, and brick, and so on. We spent a massive amount of dollars to get some of the top-of-the-edge research equipment.
Right.
As I was mentioning before we got started here this afternoon, I'm not sure I would have wanted to have stayed at a small university where I was trained to do research in physiology. And
yeah, I was going to ask you that question, because you came here from well, you had part of your education at University of Kansas, which is a big state university, and then University of Missouri, another major state university. And then you came here to what had just been a municipal university and just become part of the state system. Did you notice much difference between your experiences in the two types of institutions? Yeah,
and the thing that so affected me was that there was no laboratory. Even the teaching of the classes, I mean, there was some good instruction that people were attempting to do,
right,
but in order to teach a good, solid, modern curriculum, and I guess where Dick Flynn and I saw the profession moving where we wanted our students to go, we needed equipment. Somewhat selfishly, I wanted it for research, but of course, as part of this, to train students for the future, they needed electrocardiograph. We needed metabolic carts to measure oxygen uptake. We needed equipment to do blood assays of hormones and lactate and blood glucose, and all of this takes considerable dollars, because to equip a laboratory, I mean, you're talking about multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Now, some of the things you've just mentioned have kind of a medical sound to them. Did you, at that time, we had just joined the state university system. We became part of the same system as the University of Nebraska Medical School. Did we have much collaboration going on?
Yeah, we certainly did, and I guess I almost had to use that, because for 9 years, I mean, while we were able to get together some very limited funding to start buying some equipment, it was a long, slow process, and frustrating at times. I'd come up from a program at the University of Kansas, where in order to learn anatomy, I mean, we took the anatomy course with the medical students, and we dissected the cadaver. I mean, so there's nothing that replaces that. Looking at pictures in books, or even working with skeletons and anatomical models and so on, that can only take you so far. So I immediately went to the medical center. As a matter of fact, my first research after I completed my dissertation was over at the pulmonary physiology unit. Got to know some people there, and that led to work with people in cardiology. But over a period of years, I've worked with 8 different departments at the medical center. And I always found people so gracious and so willing to want to combine. I think even in that era, medicine was beginning to realize that exercise might be a good thing for human health. And I guess I felt a real zeal to help communicate that, not only in the field of medicine, and a good number of my journals were published in medical journals and medical conferences and so on. But so I think it was a nice collaboration, and even to this day, I'm involved with a $2.3 million grant on osteoporosis with some colleagues over at the College of Nursing. We're applying for more funding. But some of these things today, to get the big grant funds, you pretty much need to do collaborative work where you combine multiple disciplines to more thoroughly study, you know, whatever the problem at hand might be.
That's a good thing, isn't it?
It sure is, and the research in all areas of medicine and physiology and so on, the advancement that is going on because of that sort of approach we're getting there faster.
Just for historical perspective for a second here, we mentioned that Dr. Flynn was the head of the department and then became chairman or head of the or director, I guess, of the school, and then later became dean. Who was dean when you first came here? Was it Dean Kennedy or?
Paul Kennedy was dean. Yes, he was. Yeah. And gee, he was one of those. I mean, he had an interesting influence, I think, on a lot of us, and maybe even some of us who were brand new to the campus and so on. He came across with this gruff exterior. He was a no-nonsense man. I remember going into his office for the interview, shook my hand, and I mean, you knew that you were being, that he was serious. And he always had that as an approach, but I quickly learned, too, that, gee, what a wonderful educator he was. I accompanied Dick Flynn on any number of visits around this campus, trying to present logic for why we needed more money for instruction, for research, for service activity. And I saw Dick Flynn work his magic, but I mean, it took people like Paul Kennedy and some of our other deans who have been so.
Kirk Naylor would have been president or chancellor.
That was before I was here.
Okay.
There was an interim. Vic Blackwell was an interim chancellor in my first year. Okay. And then Chancellor Roskins
was dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and became interim chancellor before Dr. Roskins was.
Yes, that's right. And so some of these people were, number one, really influenced me. I mean, really gave me the perception that although UNO at that time didn't have the feel of a big major league university, it just didn't. And not that good things weren't happening, but I think in the stage of the evolution of the campus at that time, things were still working their way up the ladder, and all of this takes time and so on. But some of the administrators, from Paul Kennedy, who was so willing to help those who were willing to get up and work for it, and to keep on knocking on the door. Later President Roskins, Chancellor Roskins, when he first came here, of course, was a very influential person in the history of this campus, I think.
Yes.
I know he really impressed me. I mean, he was a gifted orator. His ability to go out and raise the funds. He became a very visible chancellor to this campus, apparently.
And in terms of academic standards, his vice chancellor, Herb Garfinkel, was just outstanding.
Yes, he was. Like any good CEO, he really collected some fine people who were going to administer all the various aspects of the campus and so on. I think that really was he did a fine job in that regard.
Well, let's shift gears for a minute, because when I think the first time I got to know you at all well was when I took a class from you. I took your course, Fitness for Living.
Yes.
And I don't think it's exaggerating to say that on the campus here you became famous for that course.
Well, you know, the course made sense to me, and back in, I'm guessing that was about 1973 when I wrote the syllabus and had that approved and so on, and then started teaching that. But really had such a wonderful response from the students. And then had a number of other real important, Tom Goudier.
Yeah, Tom and I took the course together.
Oh, okay. But had a number of other administrative people, other faculty on the campus take it.
And Regent Hansen, Clement Hansen was in that course at the same time.
He came in once and then didn't take the class, but it's interesting. He would just pop in up here.
I took it for credit.
Yes.
And I still suffer from people, little joke saying that, well, you took the course Fitness for Living and you passed it and got a good grade in it, and that means you're the only administrator on campus who's been certified by one of the faculty as fit to live. So I thought, that caused a few chuckles here and there.
No, but the class and the type of philosophy in the class, I guess I was loosely trying to set up something would take all of the current science available as to what we knew just about human health in the broad sense. So we did a lot with the physical activity, trying to help people to find something that they could really be good at, something they'd enjoy, And it could be competitive. It could be walking. Remember some of the games we used to play?
Yeah.
I mean, but just a thousand.
Tom and I were the oldest people in the class, and we got to go out and play soccer and some of these other games with kids that were 20 years younger than we were.
And you did well with it too. But we modified everything we did. You know, you wasn't. In our culture still today, as I drive around town, and I don't see enough kids out playing. I think more kids should be doing the old backyard or in the park, just some
fewer
2-on-2
computer games and more physical.
Yeah, and just games so they're out just playing and moving. But the diet, the stress management, and all of this stuff was somewhat new. I mean, today, you know, I mean, people looking at what we're talking about would say, well, gee, we know this. I mean, we've been taught this and so on. But a lot of this was quite new and refreshing. And actually, I had many people from across the country who wrote to me, had heard something about the class, and so I wound up sending copies all across the country. I gave presentations at national meetings. Just because people were curious.
It was a great course, and I enjoyed it and benefited from it. And whenever I was advising students, I always said, now find a place to include this in your program someplace.
And we immediately had a surge in people from across the whole campus. It was no longer just in the College of Education, the business school. For a number of years, I taught one section of the class for business majors, and every single semester I would teach that. We'd have 80 students. We'd fill the class to the maximum.
Well, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think it should be pointed out that in 1978 you were one of the early winners of the Great Teacher Award on campus here, and I suspect that it had something to do with that course. You were certified too as being one of the finest teachers on the campus.
Well, that meant a lot to a young professor. I mean, teaching always was and always will be probably the most enjoyable minutes that I ever spend on this entire campus, and I truly mean that. I enjoy the one-on-one with students doing research, the graduate students and so on, but being in the classroom has always been so important to me, and I'm sure many students would find this hard to believe, that a professor who's been teaching for 36 years and some of the courses for decades, that I would spend the number of hours that I do before I walk into the classroom. And but it just shows when something really has that much meaning. I want every minute to count in the classroom, and you hope in my graduate classes in particular, I'm really kind of a nut about giving the latest information on everything that I teach, and that takes time to do it. I read.
Well, that shows in the teaching that I was exposed to, anyhow.
No, well, it's good of you to say.
And you won other awards too. That wasn't the only teaching award you won, and we could go through them all. But you had the Distinguished Lecturer Award from Nashua, so you got to be their distinguished lecturer. That's the Mid-America State Universities Association, and Nebraska Professor of the Year, the Council for Advancement and Support of Higher Education, and Graduate Mentor Award, I think. I mean, there are numerous like that. We could just keep going. So,
well, I've been very fortunate to have in many respects, I look at the quality of the students. Some of these cliches and stereotypes about the Midwest, but I've always found that to be true. Now, I'm biased because I've never taught on the West Coast or the East Coast or something, but I only know the people here in the Midwest from a teaching standpoint. But I've always found that, the students respect someone who has a lot of respect for what they're teaching and the work that they're doing. So students will work about as hard as we almost expect them to. And I fairly consistently, that's motivated me to really value the quality of teaching.
Well, we've talked about that course that you're known so well for. What other sorts of courses have you been teaching over the years?
Well, some of the courses that are kind of a regular part of I teach mostly graduate classes over the last couple of decades. For example, right now I'm teaching an advanced physiology of exercise class. I occasionally teach an undergraduate physiology of exercise. teach another graduate class called Exercise for Special Populations. And it's about all the medical information as to how to treat people who, with arthritis, type 1, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, pregnancy, pulmonary disease, asthma, fibromyalgia. So we cover about 25 medical pathologies, and this is the norm today. Our students going out in the field, number one, used to be primarily working with just young people in the school setting or coaching, and today our people are working with heart patients, lung patients, obesity programs. So many of our students are, or almost all of our students, are working with clinically diseased populations. So that's been a thrill of a class for me to teach.
Yeah.
And I teach a research class, kind of a foundations research class too, that I really enjoy.
Well, there's no question about the fact that you have an outstanding career as a teacher, but it doesn't stop there. We've talked, you mentioned your interest in research as we've been talking here, and that's a very impressive record that you've established in the research field.
Thank you, Jack.
Amazing. You're one of the few people that not only got the Great Teacher Award here at UNO, but you also got the UNO Outstanding Research and Creative Activity Award. And that's an accomplishment to get both of those.
Well, I think the two go hand in hand. You know, within the academic world, I mean, at times people argue, well, gee, can you have enough time to ever do adequate service to teaching as well as research? And I guess I've always looked at the two as being so intertwined that many of my ideas for research have come from things I've pondered while I'm teaching.
Yeah.
There have been so many things that I learned in my doctoral program, or things that I see that we have assumed because of older research, and we just think that that this is the premise for a current understanding with something with heart disease or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And as science goes, I mean, and I see this across the disciplines. In the last 25 years, I think physics 2 or 3 or 4 times has probably almost knocked down their whole fundamentals of understanding of small particles and so on, just because some finding has indicated that there's a whole new understanding as to how matter, molecules are structured, about atomic materials and so on. And so I think the same thing goes on in all disciplines.
Yeah, we've been talking, well, a little before we started here this afternoon about the new recommendations for women with heart disease. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until 10 years ago that it was recognized that heart disease was a problem in the female population as well as the male.
Well, and with the public, you know, some of this goes back even longer than that. And unfortunately, so often the traditions and views held by the public and so on are very hard to overcome, and I think the media have a major role in how rapidly we can communicate change. You know, for probably 20-25 years, I think we probably realized that the #1 killer for women has been heart disease.
Yes.
Cancer has a greater scare factor, but nonetheless, a lot more women are being affected directly by heart disease. But the American female, and the Gallup polls and so on, only until the recent years have most women, probably through the media, have they become informed to the standpoint they realize today they need to exercise, they need to watch the diet and so on.
Now, your research interests are obviously very broad. From the material you gave me before we started talking this afternoon, mm-hmm. I noticed that you've published 3 books.
Yes.
You have 11 chapters in other books, anthologies and so on, mm-hmm. And more than 100 articles in professional journals. So mm-hmm. we're obviously not going to be able to discuss the full gamut of your research interests this afternoon.
Sure.
But I'd like to hear you talk about briefly about which of the things you've done in research you find the most interesting or the most exciting or the most fun.
Okay. Gee, my answer to the question usually is whatever I'm doing at that time. No, and my career has been researchers are often encouraged to stay within a focused area and really become an expert. You know, we understand as we do research, you learn so much every time you do a study. By the end of the study, then you really realize, oh, if I'd known this up front, the quality of the study, you would have altered the design and you would have done things differently. So there's some efficiency factor to certainly staying within small topics and isolating.
What's the old cliche? You learn more and more about less and less until eventually you know everything there is to know about nothing at all.
It's so true. But I guess I've always been driven research by just my whatever I'm just fascinated with. And I think I read so broadly. I've always felt that it's always helped me as a teacher, but I think it's always kept me so fascinated with learning. I realize how much there is to learn. And I guess even the way I teach my classes, I'm very much of an eclectic, collate information. Students today take a series of classes largely, and they take course X, Y, Z, and so on. And everything that they learn can be well taught, and they can master the content. But at times I feel like students need more training than ever before to to link the materials from one aspect of their discipline to another aspect. It'd be like sewing 10 beads together and saying, now use all of these little micro universes of knowledge in order to solve the problem. If we're trying to improve the quality of life for seniors, we have a research program going on right now with we have an exercise program for people with chronic illness at UNO. And so we've got people with heart disease, peripheral arterial disease, fibromyalgia, arthritis. The program, by the way, is for 6 months, $75, and we're still taking people who would like to sign up and be in our study as well as exercise program. But in order to help these people be healthy, I think we're slowly learning that just to get the people exercised isn't quite enough. To hop on a bicycle for 30 minutes, then to lift weights for 30 minutes, now that certainly has some wonderful things it can do to human health physiologically. But I guess our approach in our program is broader. We realize that more Americans today, as they get older, they become frail, and just the skills of negotiating stairs, the skill of being able to lift something overhead, or for a woman to reach to the top of the shelf and grab the can of peaches, or to bend over to pick up something below the sink. And in our culture, we really have never learned how to do this. And so a lot of the back problems, even in young people, we realize are people simply not moving skillfully from a motor learning, from a biomechanical standpoint. So one of my present interests in research is trying to link all of these things together and to teach people in an exercise program. We give them regular feedback when they come in, and as they walk around and do warm-ups, we've got them walking backwards, forwards, they're walking over obstacles, around things, they're walking up and down stairs, but they're getting feedback every step of the way. So it's a somewhat, I would like to think, novel program, because it tends to follow my own interest of trying to draw information together.
Well, it sounds like an interesting one, all right.
Yeah, we'll see where it all leads.
Just glancing through the rather lengthy list of your publications, looking at titles and so on, I noticed that a number of them have to do with athletic performance.
Yes.
And we talked about the difference between athletics and physical education, but was that because of the fact that many people in physical education are athletes, or is it because there's a good population of people out there who are active physically and who you can do research with? Or?
Yeah, I think a little bit of all of these. And the field of exercise physiology is fielded so heavily by people who became physiologists because they loved physical activity, or they realized how critical it was to human health. And so I think I'd be fairly typical of an exercise physiologist. I'm chronically active, always have been. I know no other lifestyle other than every day I feel the need, and I get such pleasure from playing tennis or running and lifting weights and so on. So it's very natural for people with these sorts of backgrounds to want to say, how can we make people run faster, jump higher, lift more? So my areas of research, well, one simplistic generalization or category would be to say that a lot of my research has been with the athletic population, trying to see if we can make them run faster, jump higher, and then a lot of the rest of the research has been aimed at human health. So a lot of my research has been, I've been a runner for years, and so a lot of the research, with our research equipment today, we can do so many things to answer questions that couldn't be answered because simply there weren't instruments available, 50 years ago and 30 years ago. And in our lab, we have such wonderful equipment. We have terrific support on this campus to help us buy expensive equipment, maintain the equipment, and so on. And then through collaboration with the medical center, even if there are certain things that I want to measure, some of my studies on echocardiography could never have been done unless I had colleagues at the medical center who were very interested in some of the joint prospects.
Well, if nothing else, Chris, I think maybe our audience listening to you today has perhaps been able to dispel some of the stereotypes of the athlete who takes physical education major because that's the easiest thing there is to do.
I think many people who might walk into the typical classroom and just take a series of classes would probably be surprised that there's so much science, everything is so much more research-based today. But as I look at what my colleagues up and down the hallway do, when I look at what the students are studying, just to look at their books, and it's just much more research-based field. I would almost suggest that it's perhaps a more research-based field because the things that we're teaching and we're doing, it actually can be researched. Whereas in many other areas of human endeavor and in the academic world, it's hard to research English. Now, they're English historians. They can study Shakespeare and what were the factors that shaped Shakespeare, what was civil society like in that era in Europe and England and so on. But nonetheless, in physical education, these are usually tangible things that we can probe with an instrument and so on. And I think that's just allowed the field to become much more research-based. And
well, certainly there's no question about the fact that when you're talking about these courses in exercise physiology and kinesiology, and many of these things are they're not snap courses.
They're pretty sophisticated.
They're demanding.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of math involved in the biomechanics. There's a lot of biochemistry in the physiology and so on. So our students are well grounded in the science. And then at the graduate level, I mean, I've just seen a real shift in the population of the students. We have so many more students who come to us today and they want to be employed in an area that's in the allied health professions. We have a good number of our students over the last couple of decades, more and more wind up going into medicine, going into physical therapy. But I've been to several doctors that I went to for my own question, some personal need, and they're former students of mine. So it's kind of nice to know, oh, this was a good student of mine 20 years ago, and he's now the chief of orthopedics at a certain hospital in Omaha. So it's been nice to see, some of these things happen.
Now there are lots of professional organizations in the areas you work in. Have you been pretty active in these?
Yeah, I've always been a player with all of these. Yeah, I've always been involved with one of our groups, the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. And again, that organization, there are so many splinter groups within that. I mean, there are a couple of dozen specialties within that. I've been a member since my doctoral days of the American College of Sports Medicine, and that's kind of a merging of people in medicine with academicians in biomechanics, physical therapy, athletic training, exercise physiology. But these are very reputable scientific organizations.
Yeah, there are a good
We've got,
many.
yeah, I mean, the journals are on the citation index and so on. You know, if you were to look in the medical literature, gee, these rank, you know, quite
Sure.
well in comparison with medical journals in the field.
And another thing I noticed that, well, I know you're speaking next month to a group that I'm associated with, but I rather imagine you're in pretty high demand for talking to groups like that, aren't you?
Well, I've been fairly busy as a public speaker, and I've always enjoyed that. I'd have to admit, I've always been, you know, pretty zealous about realizing instinctively how good the physical activity is for human health. I think my own situation, being diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic when I was 12 years old, and being a kid at age 12 and starting to take insulin shots, and the medicine at that level was primitive. I mean, it was like living in a cave. And when I look back and look at the almost the absence of medical guidelines, there was so little known, and it's such a different thing today. But it's so interesting that I think in a way that too helped drive me into physical education, and I wanted to learn more. And the more science I had in my undergraduate days, when I took physiology, when I took human anatomy and so on, I became much more interested than probably most students, because I realized the more I understood with these things, the better I could help myself understand what is it about the exercise that seemingly is so valuable. So,
now you mentioned a little while ago that mostly you were teaching graduate courses these days.
Yes.
And have been for a while. Do we have a lot of graduate students in that in your area?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but I think in our whole, I've chaired our graduate program committee for some years, and gee, our numbers are probably something over 200, and it's been slowly growing over the years.
Do most of your master's degree students write a thesis, or?
It's not required, and no, at one time, through my false sense of logic, I pushed through something with our faculty years ago, thinking that all should write a thesis, and then the problem became one of quality. We simply didn't have enough people to give the one-on-one attention to that number of students.
Yeah,
so
that takes a lot of time and effort to supervise.
It does. With every student, every master's student that I have, you know, you never count the number of meetings that you sit down and talk, but even before a student gets going into reading the literature, you discuss what is the problem that you want to address. And a student has to master reading the literature. What's a legitimate problem? What isn't? What are the designs? You know, how do you measure whatever the variables are, and so on. So often I'll spend half a dozen meetings even helping the student to decide what is it that you want to test. What are the hypotheses that are being examined?
Do you have students now who are working on a master's thesis?
Yes, I have several. Yes, and I've really enjoyed that as a faculty member. Those are some of the most enjoyable hours that I spend.
What sort of problems are they working on?
Well, one student is helping to do this assessment of our exercise program for persons with chronic illness. And so he's the one. He actually has. He's an MD. He has medical training in India, and he's working in the exercise physiology lab. It's the first time I've ever had a doctor, an MD, working in the lab, getting in training in exercise physiology and exercise science, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But he's very interested with me in looking at all of these activities of daily living, and some of these factors that are so critical in terms of heart disease risk and so on. So we're looking at the cholesterol, the different types of HDL, LDL lipids, and how that's related to waist circumference and so on. It's an interesting cluster of variables.
Yeah. Let's go back for just a minute. We've talked about it in general, but let's see if we can maybe attach a few specifics to it in the short time we have left. Changes that have occurred since when you first joined the faculty here. Let's talk about curricular changes.
Okay.
How there wasn't that big a program for graduate students, was there, when you first came here?
Well, when I came there was no graduate area in HPER. No, Dick Flynn and I remember we felt the need.
So that's one area where you've seen major changes. Yeah,
so we developed a graduate, a master's program, and then we started a thesis track, and then having
Can you put any sort of chronology on that?
Oh, I'd say, I'm guessing it'd be the middle, 76, 77, maybe when the master's degree, when we began that program. And so that's been going on for some years now. It keeps
growing, yeah.
When I look at my office, I have, like many of us do, I have all the theses that I've supervised, and I've got about
and it starts to
2
fill
whole
up the
rows.
Now, right?
It fills up the bookshelves.
Right.
But I'm very prideful of all of those students I've worked with, because you get to know those people. You spend so much time with them.
Yeah.
But in terms of,
especially when you see him progress beyond that too, and
sure,
as you were mentioning, that you might go into your doctor's office and find out that he was one of your former students.
Yes, and so many more of our students. Another big change that I think we've seen, and this is a reflection of the whole faculty. I mean, when I look up and down the hallways and some of the bright young scholars in some of our programs, Dr. Jen White is doing some exciting things in the fitness wellness specialization. Nick Sturgeon, our biomechanist, and Dr. Shinji Chen, and they're both biomechanists, and they've got some huge amounts of grant funds. They're doing some, just cutting edge type thing in that field. But up and down the hallway, gee, there are people doing just such exciting things. But really, the ramifications of all of these things are just leading more and more of our students to go on for the PhD. And I'd say in the last 15 years, we're just, this exponential rise has been really exciting to see. As I go to my national meetings and so on, or I pick up my journals and I see, oh, there's an article by one of our former students. That's an exciting thing for us to see.
Any plans in the future for a doctoral program here?
Well, we talk about that at times. Some years ago, we were trying to link up with the interdisciplinary program at UNMC, and at that time, the faculty felt like we were too thin. We just didn't have the manpower to do it. I think we're a lot closer to doing it today, and I would be surprised if within the next 5 years, if we don't start to put something together. I hope that could be done, because I think we have such a good number of sharp young people as they go through our master's program. There's so many people that I say, oh my goodness, you've got to go on, and I wish you could go on here.
Well, we've got less than 2 minutes left here. I want to give you a chance to talk about, we've talked about a lot of people as we've gone along here, but if there's anyone we've left out that you can remember that you'd like to include, want to mention?
Well, let me say just a quick word, maybe more about Dick Flynn. Dr. Flynn hired me. He became the Dean of the College Education, is Springfield College President right now, and doing a terrific job there, I know. But Dick was so influential in my character, and I think did so much good on this whole campus. I think a lot of the things he did in HPER, but also when he was the interim director of the tech program down on the South Campus and so on, Dick was very concerned and did so much because he loved UNO.
Have you ever been back to Springfield and visited?
No, but I will get there. Dick and I still correspond a lot, and I'd like to say a quick word about Dale Weber too. One of my people who is so influential on this campus, and just such a joy to have a leader like that on campus. He and Chancellor Roskins both impressed me personally and professionally, and I just know that they've left a permanent effect on where we are today.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I've enjoyed our conversation this afternoon. I hope you have too.
I certainly have. And, thank you, Jack.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us today in a visit with Dr. Kris Berg, a longtime and distinguished faculty member here at UNO. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of those who have made this history. This is Jack Newton, inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.